Ace Podcast.
Hey, this is David Allen from Confession Radio Podcast, and you're listening to Vaguely Accurate on the Ace Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another fantastic episode of Vaguely Accurate. It's time to get a little bit sciencey. I am your host, Danny Kay, and today we'll be learning about childhood narcissism. We meet Kate Derry from the University of Western Australia in the School of Psychology, who investigates the effect and development of childhood narcissism, or the narcissism in children, and also how parenting techniques can induce various forms of narcissism within children. She has also got some university advice for those out there thinking about going to university as someone who has jumped around the system a little bit. However, before we go into the show, I would just like to do a brief announcement. Vaguely Accurate Series 1 is starting to wrap up. We're not quite there, but we're almost finished with Season 1. But don't get too disappointed. Season 2 is very close and it is on its way. The break is going to allow me to put a bit more time into the production. We are changing directions a little bit. We'll still be meeting people because that's what we do. We're going to change up the format to where each series of Vaguely Accurate will address a real-world problem, which is under current investigation by cutting-edge institutions and research centres. Throughout the series, we'll be meeting students, specialist researchers, and science communicators to deliver you a story of science with tangible applications. By providing a narrative, we hope to provide context of a scientific endeavour many may not understand at first glance. Unfortunately, I can't tell you who we'll be working with for this upcoming season. I can say you should be really excited about it in this new format. Everything that I've learned throughout this season is going to be applied and it's going to be amazing. I guarantee you're going to want to listen and share it with your friends. On that note, please pop onto iTunes, rate and review us. It really does help. Share us with your friends and family. And if you yourself want to feature on an episode, get in contact with us.
So my name is Kate Derry and my field is psychology. So I'm a PhD student at the University of Western Australia, studying in the area of social and personality psychology and child development.
What does psychology mean for you? Can you define the field of psychology in your own words?
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
So I think psychology for me is mostly about self-understanding. And then once you sort of can learn to understand yourself, you have a space where you can start to understand other people as well, and understanding the processes that are unconscious to most people as to why they do things, how they think, how they behave, and being able to create change through that.
Okay. Coming into the field of psychology, you recently just told me that you took a lot of detours before finally landing in this research path. Could you tell us a little bit about how you ended up where you are?
Yeah, so I think at the end of high school, I had really high marks and no passion, no sort of motivation to find what it was that I wanted to do, because I was really burnt out with just having to get high marks and the best scores all the time. Had a bunch of mental issues as well that I was dealing with, and really I should have just taken some time off, but there's so much pressure in our society to always have to keep working and being the best, and because I had such high marks, I had to go to uni.
You had that expectation from your family and friends.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where I ended up. But it's really hard to do well at university unless you're passionate about what you're doing. It's quite different from high school. So moved from journalism to commerce to dentistry to nutrition, makeup artistry for a little while, then took some time off, managed a cafe, and eventually just wanted to answer the big questions, like, what are we doing here? Why is life the way it is? And was talking to someone in Sydney about it, and he recommended that I study philosophy because he's just like, these are the questions that you're into. That's what that field is. And studying philosophy after trying 5 different degrees was not a solid career path. So everyone advised me match it up with something, and I chose psychology. And then by the end of that undergrad, I just liked psychology more than philosophy.
Yeah. And what made you, I suppose, go into a research direction as opposed to coming out with your psychology degree and being like, time to find a job?
The thing that attracted me to philosophy was I wanted to ask the big questions. But I guess the thing with philosophy is you can never really answer them. You just go around in circles and you're asking questions for the wonder of asking questions, I suppose. Whereas psychology was able to sort of give you some firm answers and something to actually hold on to, and you could actually figure out the questions and empirically test them and get solid answers.
It was almost applied philosophy.
Yeah, no, but that's exactly what it is. Psychology is basically applied philosophy. And then I guess clinical psychology is going in one direction. You still need to do a postgrad to do that. You can't do that with just an undergrad.
Yeah.
But the research, after doing my honours project, and once you actually get the data and you're collecting it and you're asking the questions and then all these numbers suddenly turn into a yes or no to your hypothesis, it was such an exciting and inspiring process that I just wanted to do it again. So when students or parents ask me about this now, I always say, if you don't know what you want to do at uni, don't go, because it costs money. Yeah. And faffing about like I did ends up creating quite a large HEC debt. Whereas if I just had have taken some time off and gone, who am I? What do I really want? Let's just explore that on my own for a little while. You can form a clear picture of what you actually want, and then you go to uni with a much stronger motivation and you do a lot better. Yeah. Like every university is very keen to take on mature age students because they know they're motivated. It doesn't matter how well they did in high school. If they're coming back as an adult knowing what they want, that work ethic will get them much further than their innate intelligence.
Yeah, I understand. That makes complete sense.
Mm.
So, moving on. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about your research? Yeah. What is it?
So, my thesis is called When Every Child is Special, the Structure and Development of Narcissism in Children.
Okay.
So, I'm looking at narcissism as a personality trait, so not people who have narcissistic personality disorder, but as narcissism manifests in everyone in the population. Some people have more, some people have less. And what does it mean at a non-clinical level? And yeah.
Are you able to define narcissism?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So in research, narcissism is usually defined by what it's correlated with. So it's an inflated sense of self, so where your idea about yourself is larger than what the reality of yourself is.
Okay.
Unrealistic expectations, extreme negative response to negative feedback, entitlement, lack of empathy, aggression, those sorts of things.
Being a sore loser, kind of, that come into the
I guess being like a very confident, arrogant person that cannot take on loss or not being a winner all the time.
That's a question I have. Is arrogance always associated or derived from narcissism?
No. Most people who are narcissistic are arrogant, but not everyone who is arrogant is narcissistic.
Okay. Is there a reason for that? Do you happen to know? I'm just curious.
I don't know. All I know is I do factor analysis, which looks at all of the different things that make up the structure of narcissism. And while arrogance is always correlated with narcissism, which means it's associated with it, it's not an actual integral part of the structure of narcissism.
Okay. Tell us a bit more about narcissism. So you've said that you've got this kind of factor of narcissism, or factors, sorry. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us what they are?
Yeah, so just to go a little bit more about another definition of narcissism. So in clinical psychology, they define narcissism less by what it's correlated with, but more how it's believed to develop, but there's not really solid evidence of that yet. So in clinical psychology, they talk about this inflated sense of self is a result of maladaptive parenting practices that make the child feel not good enough, so they need to create this inflated sense of self to cover up that sense of inferiority.
That's the complete opposite of how I would have thought it would go.
Oh, really? How would you have thought?
I would have thought the more narcissistic a child is, the more praise he's been given. Whether he did good or bad, it just hasn't had any reality checks.
Yeah, flipping back to what you asked before, what is the factor structure of narcissism? That's kind of was the first question of my thesis, and it is sort of generally recognized in the adult field that there's two major types, a grandiose and a vulnerable type. I usually use these examples just to help people create a picture in their head. I'm not diagnosing either of these people with narcissistic personality disorder.
Pictures are good.
But grandiose narcissism is the idea of sort of Kanye West or Donald Trump, like a highly successful, materialistically successful person who just thinks really highly of themselves. Kanye West saying that he's Jesus, like it's just higher than actually the millions of dollars that he's earning. Like as rich as he is, he's not Jesus.
Yeah.
And then the vulnerable type is more George Costanza of Seinfeld. So wouldn't necessarily know from looking at him walking into a bar that he has such a high opinion of himself. But once you're actually in his friendship circle and you're hearing his innermost thoughts about himself, you realize, wow, you actually think you are a lot better than most people would rate you.
Yeah.
Those, from my research, are linked to two different parenting styles. So one is the one that you were talking about, which is still maladaptive parenting because you're not responding genuinely to the child's needs. So if you're telling a child, oh my God, that picture is the most amazing picture I've ever seen, every time they draw something, half the time they're going to go, well, I only spent 5 minutes drawing that. I know it's not great. And you're telling me it's perfect and I'm special and I deserve a trophy, when I know that that's not true. So I feel like either you think I'm not capable of doing any better or you're just patronizing me.
Yeah.
So even that sort of positive phrase can be seen negatively or felt negatively by a child, even though most children are not necessarily aware of that dynamic.
Okay, so give them more credit than what most parents or people do.
Yeah. It's totally on a subconscious level for kids, though. I don't think any kid necessarily goes, this is what mum's doing to me, like with their little psychology hat on. They're just sort of going,
psychoanalyze
oh, I mean, you're giving me this positive feedback, but it doesn't make me feel good. And that contradiction between the expectation of what their parents feeding them and the reality of what they feel is what I think creates maladaptive self-patterns.
So which one does that lead to? That overpraising? And
that's the grandiose type of narcissism.
That leads to Kanye West.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I feel...
Okay.
You can't say that.
I can't say that.
I don't know what Kanye West's life is like. He's just an example.
As an analogy.
Yeah.
We are unsure on many other factors.
Yeah, so grandiose narcissism, it leads to the type of narcissism that's correlated with extroversion, high self-esteem, extreme confidence, and aggression.
Okay.
So it's sort of according to the American ideal, this can seem quite adaptive because that's sort of what they promote in people. If they're making lots of money, you know, the soul soldier who's, you know, just doing the individualist fight.
The heartless stock trader kind of thing.
Yeah. You know, that's, you know, Americans love to glorify that character, and that is grandiose narcissism.
So to say this way, but do they also have a lack of empathy or sympathy for others? Is that another factor that's usually correlated with it?
Yeah, and aggression. So one study did find that the higher a person's self-view, the more aggressive and hostile they are to negative feedback.
Okay.
So some people just say grandiose narcissism is just high self-esteem. You know, these people just have high self-esteem. But I would say Obama had high self-esteem as well as being, you know, like a little bit arrogant or grandiose because he was in, you know, a very prominent role. But he didn't have that same sort of aggression and interpersonal dysfunction that Donald Trump has. Same with, I guess you could look at maybe Jay-Z with Kanye West. You know, both of them earning just as much money, are equally famous and successful, but one seems to have this strange interpersonal dynamic, whereas the other one is just highly confident.
Yeah, one has a bit more flair about himself.
Yeah.
It's kind of peacocking, I suppose.
Yeah.
So the second personality trait would be that more subtle, until you actually converse with them, you don't realise how... Maybe, I don't want to use the term delusioned about themselves they are, but delusion from reality and expectations or something like that. And how would that one come about?
So vulnerable narcissism is sort of the major question in my thesis. So currently all the measures of narcissism in children are grandiose measures. So it just talks about, does the kid think that they're more special than other kids, they deserve more than other kids, their class would be less fun without them in it. Vulnerable narcissism is not sure how it develops. Well, it wasn't prior to my research, and they weren't sure if maybe it's just the more adult progression of grandiose narcissism as you sort of leave high school and you're no longer protected by this everyone's a winner, everyone's special culture that we're raised in school, and you start going into the workplace and dating and face constant rejection as you don't get the job that you hope for, you don't get the girl that you hope for, life isn't what it looks like in the movies and it's not how you're told it's going to be. And some people then just can't handle that and develop a vulnerable self or a more pathological type of narcissism. But what we've found is actually that does exist in childhood as well. So there's just two separate types and they come from two different paths. And vulnerable narcissism is linked to what we call psychological control, which is sort of parental intrusiveness or manipulation of the child. It's a kind of parenting style. It sounds quite bad, but in practice, it's not really like that. Those parents are usually quite well-intentioned and it's not
necessarily intentional in their aspects.
Yeah. Well, and I think as well, like when parents don't have a lot of time or sort of communications training, and so they'll use techniques such as, if you don't do what I say, I'll stop looking at you. I expect you to know that what I choose is best for you without explaining that to you, and sort of overriding the child's right to know with the parent's authority.
Okay, so it's like you don't need to know that now. Downplaying their curiosity or kind of downplaying.
Yeah, and just using sort of passive-aggressive techniques on children where the kid's not really aware.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So you've got these, just kind of summarize, you've got your research is looking into how narcissism exists in children, and then rather than developing into adults, it's kind of how it exists in children and can later kind of be more prevalent in their adult lives. And you've got two forms. You've got grandiose narcissism and vulnerable narcissism. Grandiose is kind of that overpraising, patronizing parental techniques.
I think with overvaluation, that's the parenting style. With grandiose narcissism, that is like when the parent just overvalues their child. So they're not trying to be patronizing. The child will see it like that. The parent just actually thinks that everything their child does is perfect and their child is special and they can do no wrong, which is just not the child's reality. Yeah, like the child knows sometimes I'm good, sometimes I'm bad, sometimes I do it right, sometimes I do it wrong. And that's the reality of all people, whereas an overvaluing parent doesn't see that. They just see their child as all good, all perfect, all the time.
And then the second one is the vulnerable narcissism, which is they feel like they have been, I suppose, spoiled by everything in a respect where, like, you get the first prize and whether you came last or second in that whole kind of, I think it was millennial parenting techniques. I think
but not just parenting. That's how schools work now. Yeah. So every kid wins. Everyone's a winner of a sport game.
Yeah, and
everyone gets a trophy.
It almost becomes a coping mechanism when reality finally hits. They're not in this kind of childhood bubble of everything is sunshine and flowers. They're kind of, it's a coping mechanism to go, oh crap, I didn't get that job. I didn't get a university placement I really wanted. Negative things do happen to me. And some people can take it either personally or some people can kind of develop this, like you said, vulnerable narcissism as a coping mechanism or a tool to self-validate themselves, to validate what they do is important and will give them what they want still.
Yeah. Well, it's thought that narcissism develops as a cover for low self-esteem. So a kid doesn't feel like the best, but then they're sort of being told that they're the best or that they should be the best. And then so they create an inflated sense of self to override that. Yeah, and then as they grow older, they just kind of repress that internal true sense of self that they know can be wrong and bad sometimes and just go with the I'm perfect and right all the time.
So it's kind of like when you, as a character frame model, that's wrong. And it's just like, oh no, I didn't do bad in the test. The test examiner must have been wrong or something like that.
Yeah, and you see that, I mean, it's on TV all the time with, X Factor contestants who get told you can't sing and they just refuse to believe it. They're like, you are wrong. I can sing. I'm the best. I'm going to show you. But then also you see it in yourself every day when you deal with some sort of rejection and you just make an excuse as to why it's not really to do with you. It's some sort of external thing that is the reason for why your life isn't perfect.
Yeah. So your research, you're looking, these are the kind of two, I suppose, properties you're looking at, your factors. Mm-hmm. Are you looking at how to better define what you're doing? Are you looking at how these factors develop in children, or are you looking at the statistics of how prevalent these are in children these days compared to previous data in some respect? Or
well, it's already been found by other research that narcissism is increasing since the 80s and around about the self-esteem movement time. It's been on the rise. My research is looking at what is narcissism in children. So are there the two types that there is in adults? the answer to that question was yes. Then was looking at what causes or what is associated with these, because we can't determine cause just yet. That will be the next question.
Yeah.
And then we found the two different parenting styles. But we also found that the child temperament by 8 years old actually predicts more than parenting styles. So that's the child's own sensitivity to punishment and reward. And with grandiose narcissism, children are very sensitive to rewards, which will then have an impact on, if parents are constantly giving them positive feedback and that child is really sensitive to positive feedback, it's this cycle. It's beyond the scope of my research at this time, but that is the most interesting question for the future is, so now we know at 8 years old, parenting does predict narcissism, but the child temperament predicts it more. And so which comes first? Is it the child's sensitivity makes the parent give them feedback because they see their child positively responding every time they say something nice to them, and so therefore they just start saying only nice things to them because they see that? Or is it the parent only giving kids rewards that makes them sensitive? Which comes first is definitely one of the most important questions of my research. But also, what does that mean for kids? So narcissism in adults is generally considered to be maladaptive, and can cause quite a lot of problems in adulthood. But in childhood, because kids are so, they're going through this difficult time at school where they're trying to separate from their parents, make new friends, deal with the school environment, it's thought that maybe narcissism can create a bit of a resilience bubble for them to be able to cope with always needing to do better and keep trying and that sort of thing.
So it's not necessarily a bad thing for a child to have.
Well, that's what we're looking at.
Okay.
And what we've kind of found is in adults, grandiose and vulnerable narcissism are not correlated at all. So you can't be both at the same time. You can't be extroverted and introverted, high self-esteem, low self-esteem at the same time as an adult. But you can in kids, interestingly. They're quite moderately correlated. And this is sort of the dynamic that I was talking about earlier with where they have low self-esteem and that's painful. So they create a high self-esteem that's not real. And then that coexists at the same time, and they can have low self-esteem and high self-esteem at the same time because it's not enough of a conflict in their mind yet to realize that these are two inconsistent things. You need to repress one and keep the other, which is what happens by adulthood, which is, again, why looking at the development, if I was able to track these parents and kids over 20 years, that would sort of show how that dynamic of self-esteem and narcissism develops over time. But at the moment, we just have this photo shoot of childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and can sort of try and make hypotheses about how that develops through that.
Look at how you bridge the gap, I suppose.
Yeah.
So how have you collected the data for your research?
With most of my studies so far, it's just been surveys online because in order to look at the factor structures of narcissism, you need very, very large samples. So at least 200 people. So I needed 200 parents, 200 kids, and then 400 adults in order just to look at the factor structure of narcissism. And so that's the easiest way to do that. There's a lot of questions as to the validity of online self-report surveys, but I think there's also a lot of pros to that because people, it's convenient for them. They don't feel like they need to please the researcher, and therefore that activates a whole bunch of biases because they're just doing it in the comfort of their own home. And so that allows them to just maybe be a little bit more honest. But with my last study, which I've just finished collecting data for now, was actually in person at SciTech, getting parents and kids to come in, and they do a little computer task which measures the kids' heart rate when they get rewards and punishments in a computer game. And then they do a very challenging maze task. It was very, very challenging. So basically, it's just like a frustration tolerance exercise to see how these kids respond to rewards, punishments, and then frustration. And these are the sorts of things that you'd think that will bring out the narcissism in children.
I suppose, are there any factors such as mental health, or does the relevance of their level of narcissism, whether it be grandiose or vulnerable, affect their success later in life?
What do you mean about the mental health factors?
If a child was to be, develop a grandiose sense of narcissism or more vulnerable, and maybe later in life they still kind of carry those characteristics, is there a correlation with things like depression?
Yeah. So with grandiose narcissism, it's generally considered adaptive because intrapersonally the person feels like life is sweet. So clinically, a person with narcissistic personality disorder in a grandiose sense would never go to a therapist and say, I don't know what's wrong, but something's wrong. Can you help me figure it out?
Yeah.
They're usually dragged in by their employer or their wife or their children, and that those people are saying, please help us. This person is undealable with, sort of thing. But because that person is completely oblivious to any sort of dysfunction, they just think it's everyone else. It's sort of adaptive in that sense, but it is correlated with aggression, substance use, and sort of interpersonal issues. So cheating, lying, and or social isolation in adults. So what might be a factor is there is a push in grandiose narcissism where, because you're so oblivious to any sort of dysfunction that's going on, and you do have that really high level of arrogance and confidence, you generally can do quite well in sort of a reality TV celebrity sense or a sort of a business sense, and you can end up making quite a comfortable, successful life for yourself. Whereas vulnerable narcissism, they are so sensitive to punishment rather than being sensitive to reward.
Yeah.
And because of that psychological control parenting, there is this idea that I'm not good enough. I need to be what my parents want me to be in order to be okay. And that's sort of a never-ending battle, because to get to true happiness, you have to be what you need to be, not what someone else needs you to be. Older you get, the harder it is to take on that rejection, the more sensitive you get to it. And also the more control you have into, I'm just not going to put myself out there anymore. So with kids in school classes, you can't just say, I'm not going to school, I can't deal with this. But once you leave school, you can say, yeah, I'm not going to push myself. I'm just going to live at home by myself. I'm not going to look for a partner because I can't deal with the direct rejection. I'm not going to try for a better job because I can't deal with the rejection. I'm just going to sit in my room, in my parents' house, and talk about how I deserve better. And I'm better than this, but without the...
How does... I've did a bit of Googling on you before, obviously. And you mentioned social media before. Mm-hmm. How does social media play, especially kids are obviously without any connotations, they're always on social media, it's their thing right now. How is that playing an influence in the development of a child or their level of narcissism into adulthood?
Yeah, I did some research on social media in university students and didn't find much at the time, but that was before we found this association with child temperament and their sensitivity to rewards and punishment. And looking at that, I would now make the hypothesis to say the reason why social media is so perfect for someone high in narcissism is that there is that constant ability to get rewards. So every like, every comment, every time you log in and there's that little red, is it a little red symbol that
Facebook
means you've got a notification someone likes you.
Yeah.
You get that little boost. That's the same as getting points in a video game. And someone high in narcissism, that builds their sense of self, because their sense of self is built on external feedback like that. It's not internally regulated like a healthy self-esteem is.
Yeah.
And it becomes an addiction for someone high in narcissism. So they're constantly checking, and that's the sort of thing you'd want to measure in that sort of study. How often are you logging back in to check how many likes you've got? And if you don't get X amount of likes within X amount of time, I know some people that would then delete that picture because it's just not good enough.
I know some too.
But then at the same time, there's also that sensitivity to punishment opportunity in Facebook. And so when people are not liking and not commenting, that's all rejection. And because you're also constantly evaluating yourself against others and you're looking at other people's profiles and going, well, people are liking their stuff and commenting on their stuff, they're not liking my stuff. That's all of the punishment and rejection that a narcissist is sensitive to as well. So it's really a perfect opportunity, because you can just be logged in all day and constantly putting things out there that's going to measure that up.
Yeah.
You can see how that can really quickly turn into someone's whole day.
What are the applications of your research? Are there any direct applications that would be relating to child development or parental techniques?
I guess at this point in time, looking at how do we fix narcissism is still a question for the future. But with the information that I've collected at the moment, I guess the application is informing parents that those types of parenting practices might not be the best way to increase their child's self-esteem, and that's generally why parents do that. Or, you know, it's really important to learn to validate your child's actual feelings rather than always telling them what you want or just always telling them that they're perfect. Yeah. And a lot of parents find that really hard to hear, especially parents of adult kids, because they'll feel like it's too late, and it's much easier to say, I don't believe you, than to go, oh my God, I've been doing that for 30 years. Now I have to change, but all of that 30 years is too late.
Yeah.
So, and it's just this slow attempt at the reversal of this self-esteem movement of the belief that people have to be perfect, they have to be special, they have to be winners, because we can't all be special. If we were all special would not mean special anymore. Yeah. And I think the perfect thing as well, people think that they need to tell other people that they're perfect and then believe that. And that's, you know, how you describe your partner or your child, you know, like my kid is perfect. Look, I've had a perfect baby. Or, you know, on Christmas or your partner's birthday, you're like, you know, you're perfect to me.
Yeah. When
what you're trying to say is I love you. And that's the difference. People need to know that they're loved, even though they're not perfect. And if you tell them they're perfect and you mean I love you, they're going to think, in order for you to love me, I need to be perfect, which creates this narcissistic battle in that person of I need to always be right, I need to always be winning.
And you're already
otherwise I won't have love.
Before
yeah.
you even really started developing that child.
Yeah.
It's just imagining now parents just like, oh, your baby's here. Hey, he's alright.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, he's average.
My sister was saying that the other day. She's like, so what do we say? Like, I've just had a normal baby.
Yeah, normal healthy baby.
And it's like, yeah, a normal healthy baby.
That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. A normal healthy baby is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think it's just, there's just a constant restructuring of the way we think in order to achieve that, because it's so easy to slip back into, that is the best dinosaur I've ever seen. You are a genius.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So on that, I like to always ask, do you have any advice for the audience or anything that really stands out to you that you wish to share with the audience relating to your field or your research or anything you advocate for?
I guess it's what I've just said. So everyone does things that are right and wrong. Everyone sometimes is a winner, sometimes is a loser. And I think just creating an acceptance of that, of the reality of that. And so knowing that what people need is to feel like whatever they're doing is good enough and that they're deserving of love, even if they're not winning all the time. And, you know, if you're a parent, if your kid does something naughty, you can say, you're naughty, you get punished, that's how this goes. But that doesn't mean I don't love you in this moment. Like, I will always love you. But if you do something good, you get a reward. You do something bad, you get a punishment. And that's how we teach you to be a good human. But no matter what, you're loved. And I think dealing with that specialness versus love and perfection versus good enough is understanding those differences is what I want to change in the world.
And that's it for us today. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'd like to thank Kate again for coming onto the show. It was great to hold a discussion with you. Don't forget, Season 2 is coming out soon, where we aim to provide a window into the value of science on real-world problems. And if you enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends and family. You can, if you want to get in contact with us, or with me, you can find us on all the social medias. We're all over the place. And if you would like to feature, then please get in contact with me personally with vaguecomments@gmail.com, or you can check out our website vaguelyaccurate.com and submit a form in there. It's great to have your support, guys, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Take care.
Hey there, Timmy.
It's Bobby.
I don't care.
Oh, okay.
Were you ever a child?
No.
Well, then do we have the podcast for you.
Wow, gee willikers.
Here at Turning Back the Pages podcast, we strive for excellence in children and young adult literature. We read and give in-depth reviews and overviews so that you know what's going on in the book and you know what we think.
Bark, bark, bark. Shh, calm down, Brian.
Who names their dog Brian?
I do.
That's just lame.
Oh, Sorry, Brian.
Turning Back the Pages podcast has been rated by top scientists.
Yes, I am top scientist, and I agree with this statement wholeheartedly. Now, where's my check?
So, Timmy,
It's Bob.
I don't care. You should check us out.
Oh boy, where can we find you?
You can find us at the Ace Podcast Network, along with several other really fabulous podcasts.
Like what?
Go and have a look for yourself. And remember, Timmy, keep turning those pages.
I'm trying, but the pages are hurting my hands.